Well, a very warm welcome again, guys. Hi, my name is Kasim, and welcome back again to my podcast, Journal Entries. So, in this week, what I wanted to do is I wanted to go through five essential questions that couples should honestly ask and explore before they go through the question of saying, I do. But actually, beyond that, really, I think that in all relationships, whether you're going to get married or not, or decide to have a civil partnership or decide to just stay together long term without having any sort of formal agreements or any formalities, there comes a point where the relationship goes to a different level. Now, obviously, there's big markers like a marriage, like um, having a civil partnership, like getting yourselves registered, whatever it may be. But also sometimes, as I say, some people do actually go through a route where they don't formally recognize anything, but they are together and there's a point where they go to the next level. Um, and I think there has to be a point where you start to ask and have some very serious conversations. And I guess that's really one of the first things that I want to start off by saying that, look, the reality is at some point, you do have to talk about some very difficult questions and some very difficult conversations in all relationships. But let me go back a minute because I want to read you something that I wrote in my book. Many of you will know that I wrote a book called Principal Conversations, Pre-Marriage Counseling for Engaged and Soon to be Married Non-Religious Couples. Let me read you something from it. As of 2021, the average divorce rate in the UK was 42%. In 2020, 42% of married couples got divorced, with that being 103,592 British couples getting divorced. Divorce rates were most likely to occur between the fourth and eighth wedding anniversary. So, I am happy for you, but I'm also reminding you of the reality. No, this is not about me trying to be boring and trying to remove the romance from your relationship and the union which you share. This is about me supporting you to remove your heads out of the clouds for a minute. We all have to swim up for air at some point, no matter how great of a swimmer we are or how long we can hold our breath. So let me put this bluntly. There is a chance that you might get divorced. I'm not saying that you are, but I am saying that just based on the numbers, it could happen. You have to accept that be, you have to accept that, because if you do not, then you will or potentially might end up becoming one of the 42% that does end up divorced. But the great thing is that the odds are in your favor. 58% of people who get married stay together. Whether they're happy is a different conversation. But the point is that a wonderful, successful, and happy marriage is very much possible. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise. And it is possible for you, very much possible indeed. But it also comes with a risk of potentially separating. I know that I am stating what is really obvious, but I have come to realize that some of us do not realize this truth. And it's very true. There is a lot of us out there who don't want to recognize that there is potentially a chance that we might separate, that we might get divorced. And part of the reason why I wrote that book, um, and we're going to talk about some of these questions today, is that if you look at some of the reasons why couples get divorced, a lot of it could have been avoided. And the reality is, there's some people who should not have got married. There are some people who should not be together in a long-term relationship. Now, there is a different thing if we're talking about hookups. There's a different conversation if we're talking about situationships. But if we're talking about long-term relationships in union with one person, where you're bonded, where you're committed to each other, where you're going to spend the rest of your life together, that is a different level, right? And if you are having that kind of relationship and that kind of commitment, there are some conversations that have to be had, because if they're not had, what ends up happening is that they come out in the wash. They come out down the road. And I think, what I say in this book is, and it's part of the reason why I wrote it, when I wrote the book, I'd been to seven weddings, and five of the people's weddings that I'd been to in that 5 year period had got divorced. And when I spoke to my friends and I said to them, "Oh, can you explain to me, if you can, to the best of your ability, some of the things that you believe added to your divorce?" They talked about some of these things. Like, for example, they talked about the fact that one of them wanted four kids and the other wanted one child. There's obviously quite a dramatic difference in desires there, in wants and expectations. Because if you're thinking about having four children, that means there's a certain level of income that you have to earn. That means that there is a certain level of physical trauma that the mother has to go through, right? There's a certain lifestyle that you might not, that if you have four kids, you might not be able to do. If you're somebody who wants to be able to fly across the world, be being able to build businesses and network and do all of these kind of things, you might not necessarily be able to do that when you have four kids because for realistically the first kind of 16 years to 18 years of that child's life, they need you. You kind of need to be there. Your life has to be positioned to the needs of the child, not the needs of your entrepreneur or the lifestyle in which you seek to get. Because there are some people, for example, who have children who have ADHD, autism, or neurodiversity. And in cases like that, you cannot just live the lifestyle that you want. The lifestyle that you want really or and can live in many ways is determined by the needs of the child, if that makes sense. Um, and so these are the sorts of things. I mean, that's a really interesting conversation actually to have as a couple. What are we going to do if we have a child that has special needs, that has a disability, right? I mean, it sounds like, oh, come on, Cass, we're not going to have that. We don't have anyone. But there is a lot of families. As somebody who used to work in a high school and secondary school, I can tell you there's a lot of families where every single member of the family has no neurodiversity whatsoever. And then this parent ends up having a child who does have autism, ADHD, Asperger's, whatever, however the young person might present. And they're the only ones in the family. And the needs of that child way overpower every other family member. And this child, for example, might have tics or they may present in different ways, but that child's needs really override everything else in the family. And it's kind of like, well, what are you going to do about that? And the reason why I'm saying this is, for example, that within I'm writing a book at the moment about why some fathers abandon their children. And one of the reasons, there are many reasons, but one of the reasons why what that has led to the fatherlessness in Britain and why so many fathers abandon their children is because they discover that their child has got some kind of ADHD, autism, neurodiversity. Their child comes out as gay, lesbian, and the father cannot handle it. They've had this image of what they believed a child should be or how their parenting is going to be. They've had a narrative about the kind of child that they want, and that is not how the child is presented. And because the child is not presented in that way, it's disturbed their narrative and they just can't reconcile it. They can't integrate or shift the narrative that they have in their head and the expectations that they had versus the reality. And this is really the huge amount of why I talk about this that I talk about in this book. Isn't that what I say when I've just read that to you? Like, I don't want to break the illusion, right? What do I say? I don't want to sound boring, but what I am saying, what do I say here? I say that um, so let me put this bluntly. There is a chance that you might get divorced. I'm not saying that you are, but I'm just saying that based on the numbers, it could happen. It could happen. You have to accept that because if you don't, then you could potentially become one of the 42%. And that's all about me. What I'm basically trying to say is that there's two aspects to living life. There is the reality, and then there is the dream. There is the expectation. There is the vision. Some people spend a huge amount of their time and life in dreaming, in denial, in repression, in distraction, in splitting, in whatever. And some people spend all their life in, for example, the moment and pleasure and living and gratification, instant gratification and choice and all of that kind of place. Some people spend most of their life in the past, regret, fear, resentment. And what I've come to realize, and this is not for everybody because we're all different, is that realistically, especially in the context of a relationship, you kind of have to filter through all of these. Sometimes you have to go into the past and look up where your patterns have been, what works and what doesn't work. Sometimes you do have to look into the future and have a vision and have hope and have faith. But sometimes you also have to stay in the moment. Deal with what you've got. Be realistic, actually look at the reality. And there's a combination of having to shift through these. And what I've realized is a lot of couples struggle to shift to, and here's the word, transition between these. So I think that one of the first common questions that I think all couples realistically, whether they're married or they are religious or not, that they really need to talk about is what commitment really means to them. Is it about loyalty? Is it about staying through things? At what point can you break up? At what point can you split? Does that include emotional infidelity, financial partnership, or spiritual connection? What are your deal breakers? And what I've come to realize is, and I know this may sound obvious to some of us who are listening, our version of commitment is very different to other people's versions. Our version of what constitutes as cheating is very different. For example, we're living in a world today, if you start dating, where a lot of people, when they're dating, they are dating on multiple sites. So Tinder, they're on Hinge, and actually they will stay on that for a certain period of time. But the question is, at what period of time do you get off the apps? Is it when we're your boyfriend and girlfriend? Is it when you go on the first date? Um, uh, when other people are texting you and you're speaking to them and you're liaising in a relationship, at what point do you stop? Um, these are the kinds. What counts as cheating? Is cheating kissing? Is cheating flirting? Is cheating texting somebody? Is cheating sex? What do you classify as that? When you say that we're committed to each other, and you see this at people when they get married, they say, we're going to stay together through thick and thin. Okay, what do you mean by that? So is thick and thin if you, for I discover, so I did, I discover, so I'll use myself as an example. I was dating somebody, and when I was dating them, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, I lied about my age. And the age that I told them wasn't the age that I actually was. And I don't know why I did it. Um, and down the road, like 2 days after we met, I disclosed to them that actually the first time I'd said to them about my age was not my actual accurate age. This was my actual accurate age. And they ended the relationship. It wasn't a relationship, but they ended our dating because he felt that I had lied, and he just couldn't come back from that infidelity, from that lie. He couldn't reconcile it with where we were at because he would have to constantly rejiggle everything and shift everything. And what he thought I was and how he thought I was is completely different. So I think one of the first things that a couple has to really talk about is commitment. And when we say commitment, how are we talking like we are literally together no matter what happens, no matter what challenges come up? Or is it like actually, one of the things that I found really interesting is some people are together and they say this, you're going to have ups and downs, but then when one of them is, for example, feeling that they are emotionally neglected or that their physical needs are neglected, then they don't want to keep going further. They don't want to stay in a relationship, even if the sex is good, but the person emotion is neglecting them. They don't want to keep up with it. If the lifestyle is good, is not good. So, for example, there are people where even if the sex is good and the person is good to them, but the lifestyle, there is no money, there is no income, they can't sustain the certain lifestyle that they want. There are some people who wouldn't stay, right? um, because some people want a certain lifestyle. Some people want to be able to send their kids to a certain school. Some people want to be able to go on certain amount of holidays, right? And you see this sometimes where men or women lose their job, or a mother decides that They don't want to actually, they were very much driven by their career, but they don't want to be driven by their career anymore. And they would like to now be a stay-at-home mother. And you sometimes get this a lot where the mother has been indeed focused on her career, then she has a baby, and she decides, actually, I'd like to stay at home and and be with my children, right? I don't want to experience mum guilt. I don't want to miss the magical moments, those first magical 3 years of a child growing up, where they grew up so fast. And once you miss those moments, the first step, the first word, the saying daddy and mummy, once you miss those, you can't get them back again down the road. Those first 3 years are quite critical. And then if you haven't had that conversation with each other, you're going to have a serious problem because now, for example, if we use a man as an example, the man in this example is going to have to be the one that is taking the full brunt of the income of the family. And then you have to talk about what pressure that adds onto him, right? What else? What happens if your family doesn't support your partner or doesn't support your decision? Or there's conflict there. What happens there? Commitment is a really weird thing. And it's a conversation that really has to be talked about. What are your deal breakers? If you decide to start being an entrepreneur and starting your own business, that would be a deal breaker for me because I want the consistency of someone who has a regular income. There are some people who I've interviewed, and I said to them, why did you choose your partner? Why was this person the one for you? Do you know what they said to me? Because they had a job which was consistent, and I grew up in such turbulence and uncertainty that actually I was excited and I felt safe around somebody who had a boring job, but the job was always consistent, right? What I remember something that changed the course of my life. Actually, is one of the reasons that led to me starting to do research and being interested in this subject of human psychology. I used to work with a girl called Natasha, and Natasha went through domestic violence. Well, I didn't know it was domestic violence back then. Um, and I asked Natasha, Natasha had such a wonderful family. The dad was such a nice person, mum's such a nice person. And Natasha ended up in a relationship with a guy who was abusive, um, very toxic. And I asked Natasha, Natasha, how did you end up in this situation? Your parents are such wonderful people. How has this happened? And this is what Natasha told me. Natasha told me, I don't know how. It just happened. It was an accident. It slowly just happened. It wasn't my intention. And what I learned from Natasha, and is really what has formed a huge amount of started me on that journey of really trying to really understand people is that if you don't know what your limits are, people can very easily go past them. If you don't know what your boundaries are, your deal breakers, people can easily go past them. And that's what many times happens in domestic abuse relationship. Somebody has a boundary, they aren't aware of it, or they don't explicitly say it. The boundary gets crossed. The person then gaslights them and they keep moving forward with a boundary. And as your boundaries get violated over and over and over and over again, it diminishes your self-esteem. It impacts your sense of self and your identity. And it leads you down into confusion. And when people are confused, they're easier to manipulate and they go into safety. And sometimes safety is survival, and survival is just basically going along, becoming compliant. And then you end up shrinking the essence of who you are into a very small dot, and the facade and the persona takes over who you are. So I think one of the massive questions that a couple really has to talk about is what does commitment mean to them? Is commitment us having an open relationship, or is commitment just us two? Is commitment us being able to explore sexually with other people, but we both have to be there? So threesomes. Is commitment that whatever we talk about in this relationship will not be said to either family members or to our friends? Because there are some people who tell their best friend everything that happens in their relationship, how much sex they have, any arguments that they've had, good and bad. Some people are like, no, we'll never talk about it. Is commitment that can you outsource your support? So can you go to counselors? Can you go to priests? Can you go to imams? Can you go to councils to get support? Is that commitment? Is support, because I say this to you because we live in the UK and there's intersectionality and individuality and diversity, which means that a lot of people have been brought up, particularly in the Black and Asian and global majority cohorts. They've been brought up in families where you are not allowed to outsource support. You're not allowed to go to social services, um childcare. You're not early help. You're not allowed to get nannies. You're not allowed to speak to and go and get universal credit or apply for any kind of credit. You're not allowed to do these things. Have you had that conversation? And what's going to happen if one of you becomes disabled? Have you even talked about that? When you get older, is one of you expecting for your parents to move in and take care of them? These are big conversations. So that's the first question, really around about commitment and what that really means. The second question is, I've been talking a lot about this, and this is a major one, is do you want kids and what kind of parents would you like to be? You want to talk about how many kids do you want, if you want any? When do you want them? Do you want them a year into your relationship? Do you want them 5 years into your relationship? I say this to you because when I wrote a book, I can't remember which book it was, but I was writing a book, and one of the things that actually it was this principal conversations, and one of the things that I discovered is there is a lot of people who end up getting divorced because their partner said to them, "We're going to have kids, we're going to have kids." 7 years, 10 years. 15 years into their marriage, they still haven't had the child because their partner is not ready. And now they're 41 and their eggs are dwindling, and they're getting to that point where they're not going to be able to have kids. They're going to have to go through IVF. So if you don't have that conversation, you're going to have a serious issue on your hands. What about parenting styles? Are you strict? Are you gentle? Are you traditional? Are you conscientious? Do you want to send your kids to private school? Do you um do you want to homeschool them? Who's going to homeschool them? What values do you want to pass on to your kids, if any? What was your childhood like? What were your parents? What's like? What is the one thing? Will you allow your parents to look after your kids? If you have kids, are you going to, if you, for example, had a narcissistic father or mother, are they allowed to see your kids? Are you going to leave them alone with the kids? Are you going to get a nanny? Are you the kind of people who want your kids to be in loads of different activities, sports, because that's not what you had? What if your child comes out as gay or lesbian? What are you going to do about that? What if your child has a disability, ADHD? What are you going to do about that? What about the schooling education system at the moment, which everybody says is failing? What are you going to do if your child is bullied? Where do you want to live? Because you may be living in the middle of London, but actually, in order to give your child the kind of education and the lifestyle and to give them what they or what you never got, you may have to move to the suburbs. Are you prepared to move to the suburbs, and how is that going to affect your career or opportunities and friendships and connections? If you're somebody who goes to play football, how are you going to be able to do that when you're an hour and a half away from your friends? Are you going to have to change your career? If you're somebody who's actually, when I was growing up, my dad was never around because he had to work all the time, and I want to be around for my child. I want to be around to spend time with my kid. How are you going to do that with your life? That's part of the reason why I decided to become a writer and become a counselor, because when I have kids, I wanted to be able to be around for those kids. And being a counselor allows me the flexibility to do my hours whenever I want. And if I'm an author, it allows me the flexibility to be able to work from home. So if I need to be at home with the kids, I can be. So everything around parenting. This is a massive issue, a huge amount. As I said earlier on, I'm writing a book at the moment about why some fathers abandon their children, and without a shadow of a doubt, the biggest issues that ends up one of the biggest reasons why a lot of fathers end up abandoning their children is because of the parenting relationship that they have with a mother, the in the differences that they have in parenting styles, in the way in which some children, one of the reasons why some fathers do not see their children is because the child has become estranged. The child is refused to see the father because the father is dominant and oppressive and criticizes the child, and the child they're constantly pushing the child, and the child is sensitive. The child is quiet. You know, it's quite ironic that it's always the kids who are sensitive that always end up with a dominant sort of father who just is overbearing. And these two people, and so the man ends up crushing the essence of the child in trying to change the child to become like him. What are you going to do? Are you going to be conscious parenting where what you're saying is that our job is to create an environment in which the child can blossom and become who they want to become? We're not going to tell them what religion that they should become. We're going to introduce all religions to them and let them choose. We'll tell them what we believe, but it's up to them what they want to believe. Or what you're like, actually, no, my child needs to believe in Islam or Christianity. And does your partner agree with that? And how is that going to affect them, the fact that they're living in modern Britain today? The third question is, oh, this is a massive one. Really used to be one of the main causes of separation and still is money. How do we handle money, debt, and lifestyle? And I've been talking a lot about these already. Are we going to have joint accounts or separate account? Who handles the budgeting, the bills, the investing? Who's going to pay the basic bills like council tax? How much debt do you have and how do you feel about it? What does enough money look like? These are serious conversations. If I spend £500 on an Xbox or a PlayStation, is that okay? If I spend £5,000 on a brand new kitchen, is that okay? Is money, if we spend a big sum of money on things that are for the family, is that okay versus if I spend big amounts of money that are for me, but it's my money? What does my money mean? Because remember that when you get married, there is no such thing as mine and yours. Everything legally, from a legal perspective, is in the marriage. If you get inheritance, whose is it? Right? Like debt. Whose debt is it? Because technically speaking, from a legal standpoint, when you get married, the debt is the marriages, it's the relationship, it's both of yours, not just one of yours. So what happens? How much of the debt are you going to pay off? If some of you have if one of you has over 50K because you've gone to PhD level worth of education and the other doesn't, who's responsible for paying off that debt and how much of it? Or are you going to be these kinds of people who don't worry about that? What percentage are you going to get life insurance or not? Do you intend to buy a house or don't you intend to buy a house? Do you want to buy a house and then do it up? Do you want to live in a flat? Do you want to rent? How much do you want to travel? Do you want to go on 3 or 4 holidays a year, or do you want to go on one big holiday? Do you save all throughout the year and then go on a massive holiday and just spend huge amounts? Or do you go on weekends away to Cornwall? Is a holiday down to Wales okay versus a holiday in the Maldives? Money is a very serious issue in terms of conversations that couples need to have. Whose money? If one of you earns more than the other, how does that work? What happens if a wife earns more money than the husband does? How does that play in terms of relationships, control, power, roles? Because in any relationship, there's always a power is always present. Control is an element of it. Who's leading the conversation, who's following, who's suggesting, who's going along with it, who stops the conversation short, who interrupts, who doesn't interrupt, who ultimately, it's an interesting conversation. Ultimately, in our family, the decision lies with this person. Who is it? Is it the man? Or is it the woman? Or is it both of you? What if both of you disagree? Who gets to win? If both of you come to a deadlock on money or purchase or something like that, who ultimately comes out on top? These are the kinds of conversations that couples want to have before they commit and they get married. You would be surprised. It sounds simple. You would be so surprised because you're like, oh, come on, Kasim. If they disagree, then they would just sort it out. No, it doesn't work like that because people don't. People are so used to, particularly around money, because there's so much taboo and stigma around money and finances, that people sweep things under the rug until the very last minute where they have to deal with it. And then they put the person in a position where they have to choose what they're saying. And then people become resentful, angry, frustrated, they feel powerless. And in order to feel get a sense of control and power, they resort to being vindictive, sabotaging the other person. You'd be surprised. The fourth question that I think a couples really need to talk about is how do we argue and how do we make peace? It is impossible to go through the entire length of your relationship or marriage and not argue about something. Well, let me rephrase that and not disagree on something. Because some couples say to me, Cassie, we don't argue. Yes, but you can't agree on everything. There will be disagreements. When you have disagreements, do you shut down? Do you lash out? Do you avoid? Or do you freeze during conflict? What is your conflict resolution style? Can you talk about hard things without punishment or silence? Some people, when they have an argument, they storm out and they leave. They're like, I need 5 minutes, I need 10 minutes, I'm going to go out for a couple of hours, I'm going to walk the dog. Some people are like, no, we need to sit down, we need to talk about this. What happens when both of you are the opposite? One of you is like, no, we need to talk about this, and the other is like, no, I need 10 minutes out. I'm going to go walk the dog. I'm going to go get a coffee. What happens then? Right? There's a lot of people, particularly men in particular, where their mode of communication, when they're frustrated or they don't get their way or they feel powerless, they lash out, they get angry. What does that mean for you? And I will also say this, when people level up and they go to that next bit of their relationship, some people, they their true selves, their untempered self comes out. When people are still dating and they haven't got married and they haven't gone to that next level, they're like, oh, I still need to impress this person. They're still like operating on a restraint. But there are situations where people get married and they let loose. They remove the shackles and their full self comes on. And you hear this a lot. This is part of the reason why so many people get divorced get divorced within the first 5 years of marriage, because a person can keep a facade for some time, right? But after a while, you can't sustain that lying for years and years and years, or that pretense. So the true self, particularly the true self in terms of when people are in crisis or they're in a corner or they feel hurt or they feel vulnerable and they don't want to show that vulnerability, their true self comes out, and it may be ugly. And it can be quite surprising for a lot of men and women because they're like, I didn't realize my partner was vindictive. I didn't realize that they can be so callous. I didn't realize that they would use what I told them uh, in confidentiality. They would use it against me when they feel hurt. And you see that you hear this. And the ironic part of the reason why I wrote this book was because there are so many people who, when they're getting married, if you ask them at the point of divorce, did you know when you were getting married that you shouldn't have been together? You'd be surprised at how many of them, when they were getting married, they knew they shouldn't have been with a person. But they were like, things will get better, it will improve, it might change. They're in denial. And what ends up happening is that all of the red flags that they basically put under the rug and they ignored, all of a sudden come to the forefront and reveal themselves. And they're like, bloody hell, what did I do? Who did I marry? What happened? Oh my God, I'm scared. And that comes out. The last question that I think a lot of couples need to have, before they made that massive commitment, whether they're religious couples, single couples, is they need to talk about what other secrets we're not telling each other yet. I'm talking about traumas, addictions, family issue, emotional baggage, mental health concerns. What are the things that we're afraid to say out loud? And this is why I talk about things being pushed under the rug. There is a lot of people who do not talk about things that are significant and would, if they shared them, influence the other person to go in a different direction or to see them differently. And they believe that if I just avoid them or put them underneath the rug or not talk about them, that they're going to disappear. The problem is, unfortunately, patterns of behavior and secrets, particularly family secrets and traumas and addictions, eventually come out in the wash down the road. You're just simply kicking the can down the road and it will come out at some point. And the problem is, people think, and psychologically, some people are like, well, if I get the person to fully commit, then the more committed they are and the more they know about me, the more they won't change their mind and the more they won't want to leave. And it's a strategy that some people use, but the problem is they're using a risk. They're taking a risk because some people, once they discover that they've been lied to or that they've been deceived, they do leave. Whether that is somebody who cheated when they first got together with a partner and now they feel guilty and they are 5 years in and they're like, I really want to tell I really want to tell this partner that I did cheat. And the reality is that they know that if they say that, there is a very likelihood chance that they might get divorced, that they might split up, that they might not get married. And it's really hard because once you get the ball rolling on an engagement, it's really, 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 really hard. Once that momentum and starts and you're seeing the wedding venues and you're getting the cake and you're looking at the dress, it's sometimes really hard to stop that momentum. So my thing that I would recommend to everybody is to go to therapy and speak to somebody professional. Go to premarital counseling, right? Talk about this stuff because this stuff is going to come at some point. These aren't just conversations, they're foundations. If you can't be radically honest now, then marriage won't fix that. So my recommendation is really just go through, I have loads of conversations in this book and just go through some of these conversations, right? Like, do you have any savings and how much do you have? If your mother does something to upset me or crosses my boundaries that we set, what are we going to do about it? Has a previous partner ever filed charges against you in any way? How much disrespect can you take before you cut out a friend or a family member? How good are you apologizing and forgiveness? What do you see your purpose as together? As what do you see your purpose as together in life beyond being in love? Are you okay with your partner checking your phone or your Instagram and Facebook accounts without your permission? Is one of your exes If one of your exes message one of you, do you want your partner to tell you? Right? What things have you witnessed in other marriages that you want to replicate in your marriage or not replicate? Should a woman stay at home after having a baby or go to work? Do white people have a different perspective than people of different races? What are you going to do with pets? If you buy a pet together, whose pet is it? So those are some of the questions. I hope that this has been useful and informative. As usual, if you like this, please like and subscribe to the channel, comment on all podcasts, and give me a 5-star rating, I think it is, because it helps the podcast move up. Do you agree? Do you disagree? I'm always interested to hear from your perspective. So send me a message, comment below, and all that fun stuff. But otherwise, apart from that, I will speak to you very soon. Bye for now.